They died before the world heard their music. Have you ever wondered how many masterpieces the world almost lost? We often assume that if someone is truly gifted, success will naturally follow, that talent is impossible to ignore, that greatness will always be recognized. Is not like that. History tells us a very different story. Some of the greatest composers who ever lived spent their lives struggling financially, fighting criticism, or simply being ignored. Some died believing they had failed. Others never imagined that centuries later their music would be performed in the world's greatest concert halls. Today, I want to talk about something that every artist, every creator, every musician needs to hear. And not only. Recognition and greatness are not the same thing. They're not necessarily interlinked. Let's begin with Johann Sebastian Bach. Today, Bach is considered one of the greatest musical minds in history. His music is studied in conservatories across the globe. Every pianist, organist, and composer eventually encounters his work. But during his lifetime, Bach was respected primarily as an organist and teacher, not as the legendary composer we know today. After his death in 1750, much of his work faded into obscurity. It wasn't until nearly 80 years later that Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy revived the St. Matthew's Passion, sparkling a worldwide rediscovery of Bach's genius. Imagine that. One of history's greatest composers waited almost a century before the world truly understood what he had created. Then there is Antonio Vivaldi. If I mention the Four Seasons to you or anyone else, everyone immediately recognized it. Yet Vivaldi died in poverty in Vienna. His music disappeared from public awareness for almost 200 years. Only in the 20th century did scholars rediscover hundreds of his manuscripts, revealing the astonishing scale of his creativity. For nearly 2 centuries, silence. Franz Schubert is another example. Franz Schubert tells us another heartbreaking story. He composed more than 600 songs, chamber music, vocal music, symphonies, piano masterpieces, you name it. He died at just 31 years old. Only a handful of people attended his funeral. Maybe of the works we now consider masterpieces were published only after his death. He never experienced the admiration millions of listeners would eventually have for his music. And then there is Gustav Mahler. Today his symphonies fill the greatest concert halls in the world. But during much of his life, audiences struggled to understand his music. Actually, his music was quite rejected. He was often criticized for writing works that were considered too long, too emotional, too complicated, too difficult. Many of the people applauding Mahler today would probably have rejected him had they lived during his lifetime. History has a strange sense of humor. Even the great Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, perhaps the most famous composer of all, died with financial difficulties despite periods of success. His life was far more complicated than the romantic image many people imagine today. And, by the way, he ended up in a common grave. So, what do all these stories have in common? Time. Time and timing. Sometimes history needs distance before it recognizes true originality. Innovation often sounds strange at first. Art that changes the future rarely looks comfortable in the present. This isn't only true in music. You name it, it's everywhere. The people who move the world forward often spend years feeling misunderstood. That doesn't mean every overlooked artist is a genius, but it does mean that lack of recognition is not proof of lack of value. As artists, we make a dangerous mistake when we allow likes, streams, ticket sales, or algorithms to define our worth. Those numbers measure attention. They do not always measure significance. Some music is written for today, some music is written for tomorrow, and occasionally some music is written for people who haven't even been born yet. As a composer myself, this is something I keep reminding myself often. Every creator experiences moments of doubt. You release a piece you've poured your heart and soul into. You begin asking yourself whether you're wasting your time after the song receives only a handful of views, maybe a couple of likes, maybe one share, or a little bit more. History whispers something different. Keep creating. Not because success is guaranteed, not because recognition is inevitable, but because meaningful work has value even before the world notices it. Many masterpieces spent years waiting for the right audience. Some waited decades, some waited centuries. Perhaps the greatest tragedy isn't that these composers weren't fully recognized during their lifetimes. The greatest tragedy would have been if they had stopped creating because nobody was listening. So if you're an artist, a writer, a filmmaker, a musician, or simply someone building something meaningful, don't confuse silence with failure. History has proven again and again that the world is not always ready for greatness the moment it appears. Sometimes the audience arrives later, much later. Keep creating anyway.